Some people carry their dreams in their voice. She carried hers in silence, tucked between pages, folded into tips, and paid for in exhaustion. Used bookstore. Evening rain tapped softly on the glass outside, like hesitant fingers asking to be let in. Inside, the warm yellow glow of a dying ceiling light blanketed rows of faded paperbacks. The air smelled of time, cracked spines, forgotten words, and dust. She stood near the clearance shelf. Sarah, late 20s, hair tied back with a pencil, wore a navy cafe apron still dusted with flour. Her eyes were tired but not dull. She scanned the shelf like a girl searching for lost treasure. Her fingers stopped on a book with a creased blue cover. No author name, no title on the spine. Just a handwritten label inside. $1, well loved. She pulled out a crumpled tip envelope from her apron, counted slowly. A 5, 2 ones, and a quarter. She bought the book, cafe counter. Later that night, the place was winding down. Chairs flipped, floors wet-mopped, neon sign flickering outside. Bluebird Cafe. Sarah poured herself a lukewarm cup of house blend, sat at the far end of the counter away from the humming fridges. She flipped open her new book. On the inside cover, someone had written in faded ink, "This story saved me once." Across the room, POV from a dark corner table, a man in a tailored coat, mid-40s, calm presence, watched her, not in a way that threatened, in a way that noticed. He tapped his cup once, didn't sip, just watched the woman reading a book she had paid for in coins and weary hope. Sarah turned a page, her lips moving slightly as she read, like the words were waking up something in her. From the corner, the man leaned in just a little, curious, still silent. Every evening the cafe filled with people chasing warmth, coffee, conversation, connection. And every night Sarah stayed behind, not because she had nowhere to go, but because the noise of home was sometimes louder than silence. Bluebird Cafe, night shift. Present Sarah swept crumbs from corner booths. Her hands moved quickly, but her eyes were distant. Her feet ached. Her lower back protested. Still, she smiled when a customer waved goodbye, even when the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She took off her apron, revealing a worn cardigan underneath, poured the last of the coffee into a paper cup, and slipped quietly into her favorite corner. The book from the night before was already there, held together with tape and hope. Flashback, small apartment. Earlier that week. The kitchen was small. A narrow strip with peeling linoleum. Emma, Sarah's 8-year-old daughter, sat at the table drawing superheroes on the back of old receipts. "Did you eat today, Mama?" Sarah stirred a pot of soup and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I will. After you." Always after her. That night, while Emma slept, Sarah had written a full page in the back of an old book. The words weren't for anyone. Just proof she still had something to say. Back to present, cafe corner. She opened the same book again, but instead of reading, she pulled a pen from her pocket. In the blank margins, she wrote quietly. She wore her struggle like perfume, invisible, but always present. The cafe was silent now, lights dimmed, just the low hum of the fridge and her quiet pen scratching. She turned the page, wrote something else in the corner. Tomorrow, she'd write louder. Small apartment. Morning lights. Sunlight bled in through sheer curtains, the kind of light that made dust look like snow. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and cinnamon. Sarah stood by the stove pouring 2 cups of instant cocoa, one with extra marshmallows. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stirred, the toll of late nights creeping into early mornings. "Emma," she called gently. "Baby, your cocoa's ready." Living room continuous. Emma was curled up on the worn couch, legs folded underneath her, sketchpad balanced across her knees. A mess of colored pencils surrounded her like fallen confetti. She looked up with sleepy eyes and a proud grin. "I'm drawing a story," she said, holding up the page. It showed a little girl riding on the back of a giant bird, holding a golden book like a sword. Sarah sat beside her, tucking a strand of Emma's hair behind her ear. "What's it about?" Emma tilted her head. "It's about a girl who finds a book that tells her who she really is." Sarah smiled softly. "Sounds magical." "It is," Emma replied seriously. "She's brave like you. She saves people with words." Sarah's breath caught for just a second. Emma took a fresh napkin from the table and started drawing again. "I'm making the cover," she said, tongue peeking out in concentration. "For your book," Sarah blinked. "My book?" "Yeah," Emma said, like it was obvious. "You write stuff all the time in your notebooks." "I see you. One day I'll illustrate your book, Mama." Sarah looked down at the napkin sketch. It was crude and beautiful. A bird, a pen, a moon, all drawn in pink marker. She pressed it to her chest. Small apartment. Night Emma was asleep. Her small frame curled beneath a blanket of cartoon animals. Outside, rain whispered against the window pane, the kind of storm that made you remember things. Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, back hunched, staring at a box that hadn't been opened in years. She slowly lifted the lid. Inside, a beat-up leather journal, corners frayed, a stack of yellowing pages with scribbled edits in red ink. A rejection letter dated 7 years ago, folded so many times it looked like origami. Flashback, university classroom. Years ago, a younger Sarah, wide-eyed, vibrant, stood in front of a small poetry workshop, reading her work. "You write like you've lived 5 lives," her professor once said. She had laughed back then. She hadn't lived them yet. Flashback, hospital waiting room later that year. The same journal now sat unopened on her lap. Her fiancé had just been diagnosed. Her dreams were replaced with shifts, with sickness, with sacrifice. Writing no longer paid rent. Back to present, bedrooms. Sarah flipped through the old drafts. One page stopped her. A short story about a single mother working night shifts, finding scraps of magic between the ordinary. The handwriting was rushed, alive. She ran her fingers across the ink, as if touching it might pull the dream back through her skin. Then, quickly, almost guiltily, she closed the folder and slid it beneath the mattress. She stood there for a moment, hand resting above the bed, not praying, not mourning, just remembering. Because even invisible dreams leave weight behind. Used bookstore. Late afternoon. The wind carried the scent of paper and pavement. A sidewalk chalkboard read, $1 book bin. Take a story, leave a coin. Sarah stepped inside, balancing a paper cup of day-old coffee in one hand and a folded $5 bill in the other. Used bookstore. Continuous. The air was thick with nostalgia. Rows of stories whispered down narrow aisles. Faded covers leaned against each other like tired old friends. Sarah wandered toward the back, her favorite shelf, where the forgotten books waited. She didn't know what she was looking for, only that she needed something to remind her she still believed in pages. Her fingers grazed a small hardback wedged between 2 cookbooks. No dust jacket. The title on the spine had been rubbed off by time. She opened it. Inside, a name scratched out with pen, a dedication page with no words, and then, margin notes. Tiny, looping handwriting in blue ink filled the corners of every page. Rewrite this line softer. What if she forgave him here? This sentence made me cry. These weren't printed notes. These were a conversation. Between the story and someone who loved it too much to stay silent. Sometimes a story chooses you, and sometimes it brings someone else along for the read. Sarah stood there in the aisle, flipping pages, her breath catching every few turns. She tucked the book under her arm, placed her only bill on the counter, and left with no bag. Just words in her hand. As she stepped into the fading light, one page fluttered open on its own. It held a margin note that read, "There's something sacred in stories told by tired women." Bluebird Cafe. Late night. The hum of the coffee grinder had gone quiet. Dishes stacked. Lights dimmed. The cafe exhaled as the last customers filtered out. Sarah wiped the same table twice, not because it was dirty, but because she needed a moment to herself. The book she bought earlier sat half open near the cash register, pages gently rising and falling with the breeze from the overhead fan. From the far corner booth, the man in the tailored coat remained. Same seat, same black coffee, same unread newspaper. He looked up. Good book? His voice was low, calm, like jazz at closing time. Sarah hesitated, hand still on the table. It's old. Someone wrote in it. Notes everywhere. Those are the best kind, he said, sipping slowly. The ones someone couldn't leave alone. She offered a small smile, unsure. Most customers didn't speak to her unless they wanted a refill or the Wi-Fi code. He leaned forward slightly. Do you read a lot? When I can. She returned behind the counter, half wishing the conversation would end, half hoping it wouldn't. Writer? He asked, watching her. She laughed under her breath. Not anymore. Life got louder than the page. He nodded, as if he understood that sentence too well. She moved to refill his cup. He placed a $20 bill in the tip jar. No fuss, no comment. She blinked. This is too much, he shrugged. Books are expensive. As she turned to clean the counter, he called out softly, What do you read after midnight? She paused, hand on the book. Didn't answer. But the question stayed. Small apartment. Night. The world outside was asleep. A flickering street lamp painted golden bars across the floor. Somewhere down the hall, a radiator hissed like it had something to say. But the living room was still. Sarah sat cross-legged on the worn-out rug, knees tucked under her, a thick notebook open in front of her like a confession. The TV was off. The dishes weren't done. But for the first time in weeks, her pen moved without hesitation. Some stories don't start with inspiration. They begin with surrender. The moment you stop waiting for time to make room and write anyway. She scribbled down a line, then scratched it out, then wrote something else. Faster this time? Bits of napkins and grocery receipts were spread across the floor, each one with a phrase or image she couldn't let go. She taped one down, then another. The sentence on the page read, The waitress had wings she forgot how to use. Sarah stopped, closed her eyes. A small smile broke across her face. For the first time, she liked what she'd written. Hallway. Continuous, tiny feet padded softly over wood. Emma, wrapped in her favorite blanket, peeked around the corner with sleep still clinging to her eyes. Mama! Sarah looked up, startled. You're still up? Emma rubbed her eye. Did you finish it? Sarah looked down at the notebook. Not finished. Not perfect. But alive. She nodded softly. Almost? Emma walked over and curled up beside her, resting her head on Sarah's lap. No more words were needed. The lamplight kept shining. Small apartment. Next morning a gentle knock-knock of plastic against ceramic echoed from the kitchen table. Emma sat cross-legged, cereal bowl in front of her, tongue poking out the side of her mouth as she focused intensely. Markers were scattered across the table. Pink, blue, green. Some dried out, one leaking. She clutched a folded napkin, drawing the outline of a large bird with wide, sweeping wings, the same bird from her story the day before. Sarah walked in, hair up in a messy knot, the weight of barely 4 hours' sleep on her shoulders. But her face softened as she saw Emma working. What are you making, baby? Emma looked up and grinned. Your book cover, Sarah chuckled. Again? This one's better. Emma held up the napkin with both hands, proud. I added the moon. Because you always write at night. Sarah walked over, crouched beside her, and traced the edges of the napkin with her fingers. It wasn't just a drawing. It was belief, folded into pink marker and 8-year-old certainty. You really think I can finish it? Sarah whispered. Emma nodded. You already did. You just have to share it now. Bedroom. Moments later, Sarah knelt beside her bed, pulled out the folder from beneath the mattress. The notebook, taped pages, scribbled nap phrases. It was messy, raw, unfinished, but it was hers. She opened the folder slowly, with care, like placing a flower between pages, She tucked the napkin inside, right at the front. She closed the folder, pressed both palms over it. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was a draft. And that's where all stories begin. Bluebird Cafe. Evening shift. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversation, silverware tapping porcelain, and jazz humming through the ceiling speakers. Sarah moved between tables, her smile warm but automatic, the kind of smile you wear when your heart is somewhere else. He was back, the man in the tailored coat, same corner table, same black coffee, same newspaper he never read. She noticed, of course. She always did, but tonight he didn't speak. He simply watched, and when she came to clear his cup, he was already gone. All that remained was the bill, and something beneath it. Counter. Moments later, Sarah unfolded the receipt. Tucked inside was a business card. Heavy matte black with silver foil pressed into the center. No name, no title, just a cursive logo of an open book, its pages forming wings. She ran her thumb across it. The paper was textured like skin. Her eyes flicked to the door. He was gone. Again. Some people walk into your life with silence, and sometimes silence says, "You're being watched for a reason." She turned the card over. The back was blank. No phone number, no email, only a short line pressed into the paper like a secret. Leave a mark, even if no one's looking. Sarah tucked the card into the front of her notebook, beside her daughter's napkin. 2 wings, 2 whispers, 1 dream, growing teeth. Small apartment. Early evening. Steam fogged the kitchen window. Sarah stirred a pot of spaghetti sauce on the stove, while flipping through her notebook with one hand. A pen was tucked behind her ear. Her phone balanced on the counter, timer set. Emma sat on the floor in the living room, humming while coloring in her bird sketches. The apartment buzzed with life. Too much of it. The doorbell rang. Emma shouted, "I'll get it," and nearly tripped over her crayons. "Wait, honey." Too late. The door opened to reveal a neighbor holding a package meant for another building. Apologies. Awkward laughter. Emma asked if she could go play in the hallway. Sarah nodded, distracted. Then, the smell hit. Kitchen, continuous. The pot had burned. A black ring of scorched sauce curled at the edges like regret. She turned off the stove, eyes stinging, smoke curling toward the ceiling fan. Dinner ruined. Crayons underfoot. Dishes stacked. Her notebook now smeared with tomato fingerprints. She pressed her back against the fridge and slid down to the floor. Silence. A kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. Just heavy. Some nights don't fall apart all at once. They unravel in quiet, clumsy pieces. Sarah reached for her notebook, looked at the page she'd written last night. The waitress had wings. She tore it out, folded it once, then again, and dropped it in the trash. The napkin sketch Emma had drawn, the one with wings and the moon, sat on the fridge with a magnet. It fluttered slightly as the fridge door closed. Still there, still watching. Bluebird Cafe. 2 nights later. The rain was back, soft, rhythmic, as if trying not to interrupt. Inside the cafe pulsed with low chatter and clinking mugs. Sarah worked the floor in short, quiet bursts, keeping her eyes down, movements quick. The exhaustion showed deeper tonight, a tension behind her jaw, her smile slower to rise. And then, she saw him, the quiet man, same coat, same seat. But this time he looked different. The newspaper was gone. The table was empty. Just him, sitting still, watching her not like a customer, but like a reader already halfway through a story. She approached cautiously. "Back again," she said, polite but distant. He nodded, offering a small smile. "It's quiet here," she shrugged. "Quiet doesn't mean peaceful." He tilted his head. "You look like someone who's lost sleep over a sentence." That stopped her. She tried to deflect. "You're observant." "I edit for a living," he said simply. Her eyes narrowed. "Books?" He nodded once. She hesitated, then laughed, dry and small. "Figures." You look like someone who corrects people mid-conversation. He smiled. Only if the story deserves better. She started to walk away, then paused. I threw it out, she muttered. He raised an eyebrow. The story? The one I thought mattered. He leaned forward slightly. You'd be surprised, he said. I read stories, even unwritten ones. He pulled something from his coat pocket and slid it across the table. It wasn't a card this time. It was a napkin. Blank, waiting. Bluebird. Cafe. Back corner booth. Closing hours. The lights were dimming. Most tables were empty. Outside, the city hummed in the distance. That soft, lonely music only night understands. Sarah sat across from the quiet man, still unsure why. In her hands, the folder she once buried beneath her mattress. Shaky fingers opened it. She didn't speak, just slid a single page across the table. A short story, one she hadn't read aloud to anyone since college. He looked at it, didn't touch it right away. Instead, he studied her. She lowered her eyes. To offer your words to someone is to hand them a map of your bruises and hope they don't flinch. He picked up the page. Read slowly. The silence grew thick, like it had weight, like it filled the booth between them. Sarah watched his eyes. They didn't skim. They moved with intention, paused on certain lines, pressed his thumb gently into the margin beside a sentence she had once been proud of. She waited for words, for criticism, or praise, or anything. But when he finally looked up, his face said something else. Not approval, not rejection, just understanding. She whispered, Well? He didn't answer. Not right away. He folded the page once, carefully, like it mattered, then looked at her. Still silent. The only thing he did was slide the page back across the table. And beneath it, a small corner of her daughter's napkin sketch, tucked in the folder, peeked out. He tapped it once, gently. Still no words. Just a look that said, You're not invisible. Bluebird Cafe. Next night, the bell above the door chimed soft and slow. Sarah glanced up from behind the counter and saw him, the quiet man, already settling into his usual corner. No coffee this time, no paper, just a worn leather notebook in hand. She didn't approach, not right away, just watched. 15 minutes later, he stood. No words, no wave. He placed a $10 bill by the empty cup, and beside it, a folded napkin. Then he left. Counter. Moments later, Sarah approached, her heartbeat uneven. She unfolded the napkin. Handwritten. Black ink. Neat. Sparse lines. A poem. To the girl with ink-stained hands who folds her fears between pages and serves dreams beside coffee. Write louder. The world is quieter without your voice. She swallowed hard, eyes scanning the lines again. The final sentence was written larger, a little rushed, as if he had almost run out of time. Don't stop writing, ever. Sometimes the loudest encouragement is left behind, not spoken aloud, tucked under mugs, scribbled on napkins, waiting to be believed. Sarah folded the napkin carefully, almost, reverently, and tucked it beside her daughter's. Sketch in the folder, the edges of both peeked out like bookmarks. She returned to the floor, not lighter, not fixed, but standing straighter than before. Behind her, the tip jar caught the light. The poem fluttered gently inside, unread by others, but impossible to ignore. Public library. Late afternoon. The library smelled like quiet. The kind only paper and memory make. Sarah hadn't been here in years. Emma tugged at her hand as they walked through the main hall, wide-eyed. It's like a castle for books, Sarah smiled. It was my favorite place growing up. The librarian at the front desk gave a nod of recognition, a ghost of familiarity passing between them. They wandered past the children's corner and into the narrow fiction stacks. Emma ran off with a picture book, leaving Sarah by the shelves marked, Local authors. She scanned the spines idly, then stopped. Her name. S. Halden. Autumn between the pages. She blinked, pulled the book down. Her heart stuttered. Flashback. College campus. Years ago, a younger Sarah sits across from a publishing assistant at a folding table. She submitted through a small student contest, the woman says. It's just one copy per author, but it counts. Back then, it felt small. Now it felt like a lighthouse calling her home. Library. Back to present. Sarah turned to the first page. There it was, her story, typed in youthful boldness, aching with vulnerability. A line she barely remembered writing came alive again. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She just wanted to be read. Sometimes you don't lose your voice. You just forget where you last heard it. Sarah sat in the corner of the library, the book open on her lap. She wasn't smiling. She was remembering. And remembering was enough to make her reach for her pen again. Small apartment. Night. The glow of the laptop lit up the room like a cold moon. Sarah sat on the floor, legs crossed, bills spread across the coffee table like a hand of cards she couldn't win. Water bill, rent notice, credit balance, red stamps, due dates, final warnings. Her email was open beside the pile. Inbox full of auto-responses from literary magazines, small publishers, blogs she'd once admired. She clicked one. Subject. Submission. The waitress with wings. Thank you for submitting. While we found your story heartfelt, it doesn't align with our current editorial direction. She didn't finish reading. Rejection isn't just a closed door. Sometimes it sounds like silence. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in politeness. She closed the email. Opened another. Same message, different wording. She reached for her pen. Then paused. Her eyes drifted to Emma's napkin sketch, still pinned above the desk. The wings looked smaller tonight. A knock on the door broke the stillness. Landlord. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned forward and opened her notebook. Wrote 2 lines. I am tired of being brave in the dark. I am tired of writing hope I don't feel. She stared at the words. Then tore the page out, crumpled it, tossed it aside. She reached for the folder, then hesitated. Her hand hovered above it, and then dropped to her lap. The napkin art watched from the wall, quietly reminding her of the little girl who believed she had something to say. But tonight, Sarah wasn't sure. Bluebird Cafe, lunch rush. The cafe buzzed with the usual lunch chaos. Orders flying, steam rising, forks clattering against porcelain. Sarah moved between tables, distracted but smiling, the way people do when they're miles away in their mind. Her notepad was tucked into her apron. Her mind kept returning to the napkin poem, to him, to the silence that lingered after he read her story. She wiped a table, barely noticing the coworker behind the counter whispering loudly to the barista. Did you see who that was? Who? The guy in the corner booth last week. That was Jonathan Chase. Sarah paused mid-swipe. Jonathan who? The barista blinked. You're kidding, right? He's the Chase, like Chase Publishing. Sometimes the story you're writing is already being read by someone who can change your ending. Sarah walked slowly to the counter. The man in the coat? She asked, trying to sound casual. The coworker nodded. He scouts talent, never introduces himself, wants to see writers in the wild, I guess. Her heart thudded. All this time. The napkin. The silence. The poem. He knew exactly who he was, and he knew exactly who she could be. Small apartment. Moments later, she burst through the door, threw open the desk drawer, pulled out the crumpled pages she'd tossed days ago, smoothed them out on the table, rewrote the first line. She placed her daughter's napkin sketch on top of the page, like a seal, like armor. And this time, when she opened her laptop, her hands didn't shake. Small apartment. Late night. The storm had arrived without warning. Thunder cracked above the building, shaking the windows. Rain slammed sideways against the glass, flooding the gutters and roaring through the alley below like a broken faucet. Inside, the apartment was dim. A single desk lamp illuminating Sarah's notebook, now spread wide across the kitchen table. Pages covered in fresh ink. New paragraphs. New belief. Emma slept soundly on the couch, curled with her sketchbook like a stuffed animal. Sarah didn't notice the leak at first. Just a drip. Then another. Then a crash. The window in the back room burst open. Bedroom. Continuous. She ran in, socks sliding on the wet floor. Water gushed from the cracked pane, soaking the mattress, spilling over the desk. Her folder, the one with her entire story, the napkin, the poem, was gone. Papers floated like drowned feathers. She grabbed what she could, slipping, grabbing pages, the ink running between her fingers. No, no, no! When you've had to rebuild too many times, even paper can feel sacred. Even pages can feel like prayers. Living room. Moments later. Emma stood now, rubbing her eyes. What happened? Sarah knelt beside the table, drenched, clutching a handful of soggy pages, barely breathing. Emma gasped, her eyes locked on the napkin. It was torn. Colors bled. The wings were gone. She began to cry, soft and confused. My cover. Sarah pulled her close, soaked arms wrapping around her. I'm sorry, she whispered. Rain dripped from the ceiling. Ink stained Sarah's hands. Emma pressed her head into her mother's chest, sobbing not just for paper, but for a dream she believed was real. Bluebird Cafe, next evening. The rain had passed, but the clouds still hovered low, soft and gray, like the city hadn't finished grieving. Sarah walked into her shift with a different silence. Not the exhausted kind, the bracing kind, like someone carrying something precious they'd almost lost. Her eyes scanned the room. He was there. Same table, same black coffee. But this time he was looking out the window. She approached slowly, unsure. I lost the story, she said, voice low. Pages ruined, napkin gone. He looked up, meeting her gaze. Calm. Curious. All of it? She hesitated, then shook her head. Some lines stayed. Good, he said, setting his cup down gently. Because I came to ask you something. She braced herself. He leaned forward, his voice almost a whisper, more vulnerable than before. Did you write that story? Just for me? There are questions that test your pride, and there are questions that test your truth. Sarah's eyes welled. Not with embarrassment, with clarity. She shook her head. No. A pause. I wrote it for the woman I used to be. He didn't respond right away, just nodded. Slow, almost reverent, then reached into his coat, pulled out a fresh blank notebook, hardcover, embossed with the same open-wing logo from the card. He slid it across the table. No words, just an offering. Sarah placed her hand on the notebook, not like it was a gift, like it was a key. And this time, she didn't flinch from holding it. Bluebird Cafe. Early morning sunlight cut through the windows, spilling gold across the empty tables. The cafe wasn't open yet, but Sarah was already there. Sleeves rolled up, mop in hand, headphones tucked into her apron pocket. The notebook he'd given her sat on the counter, still unopened. She kept glancing at it like it might whisper something first. The doorbell chimed. He stepped in. No coat this time, just a simple gray sweater, hair slightly unkempt like he hadn't slept much. You're early, she said, half smiling. So are you, he replied, settling into his usual seat. He held a manila envelope in his hand. I brought something. He opened it, pulled out a single page. I made copies of your story, he said quietly. From the one you gave me before the storm. Her breath caught. You kept it? He nodded. That night, when you thought I said nothing, I was memorizing. He placed the page between them. His thumb brushed over a line halfway down. Some stories live beyond paper. They find their way into people. And stay there. He looked up at her. This paragraph, he said, tapping the line. She carried her dreams in silence because silence never asked her to explain. He smiled faintly. That paragraph? I read it every morning before work. Sarah blinked, stunned. Why? He leaned back. Because I needed to remember what courage sounds like. For the first time, she couldn't look away. Her words, the same ones she'd written in fear, were now keeping someone else alive. The notebook on the counter waited quietly, like it already knew what she'd write next. Bluebird Cafe. After-hours chairs were stacked upside down. The hum of the fridge filled the silence. Rain pressed softly against the windows, tapping like fingers on glass. Sarah sat across from him again. The quiet man now fully named Jonathan, Chase, though she still stumbled saying it in her head. The name didn't fit the person who left poems on napkins. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, eyes steady. You've got something rare, he said softly. I read thousands of manuscripts every month, but yours… He paused, searching for the right word. It breathes. Sarah's hands tightened around her coffee cup. You're kind. But I'm not a writer, not like that. Jonathan smiled faintly. You already are. You just haven't been paid for it yet. Praise is heavier than rejection when you've spent your life doubting your worth. He slid an envelope. Across the table, the publisher's letterhead stamped on top. Here's what I'm offering. An advance, editing support, full release under our new Voices of Grace imprint. You'd be the first. Sarah stared at the envelope like it might burn her fingers. Her breath hitched. You want to publish me? I do. Silence. Then, slowly, she pushed the envelope back. No. Jonathan blinked. No? Her voice trembled but didn't break. I can't accept something that feels like pity. He frowned. This isn't pity. I've lived off tips my whole life, she said, meeting his eyes. If I'm finally getting paid for my words, I need to know it's because they're worth something. Not because you feel sorry for me. She stood, slipping her apron back on. I don't want charity, she said quietly, glancing at the envelope one last time. I want to earn this. Small apartment, night. The envelope sat unopened on the kitchen table. It had been there for hours. A quiet intruder Sarah couldn't bring herself to touch. The room was dim except for the soft glow from the hallway light. The hum of the fridge filled the silence between her thoughts. She sat at the table, hands clasped, staring at the publisher's seal like it might vanish if she ignored it long enough. Some dreams return when you least expect them. And sometimes you're too afraid to open the door again. A small shadow appeared in the doorway. Emma, in her pajamas, hair tousled, clutching her stuffed bird. Mama? She whispered. Why aren't you sleeping? Sarah turned, forcing a tired smile. Just thinking, baby. Emma padded closer, her little feet silent on the old floorboards. She looked at the envelope, then at her mother. Is that from the bookman? Sarah hesitated. Yeah, he wants to help me publish my story. That's good, right? Emma tilted her head, innocent eyes searching. Sarah sighed. I don't know. It feels too big, too fast, like maybe I don't deserve it. Emma frowned, walking up beside her chair. You told me people who wait for perfect moments never see them. Sarah froze. I said that? Emma nodded firmly. Last week, when I was scared to read my poem in class, you said, dreams don't knock twice. Sarah's eyes softened. Emma's small hand rested on hers. Mama, she whispered, what if this is your second knock? Sarah looked back at the envelope, the seal catching the kitchen light. Her fingers moved slowly toward it, trembling but sure. Small apartment. Early morning dawn crept quietly through the blinds, streaks of pale gold cutting across the living room floor. The rain had stopped. The world smelled new, washed clean, like it wanted to start over. Sarah sat cross-legged on the carpet in front of an old box she hadn't opened in years. Dust floated in the light as she pried off the lid. Inside, her typewriter. Heavy, faded mint green, a relic from another life. She traced a finger across the keys. They stuck a little, hesitant, as if waiting for permission to speak again. There's a sound old dreams make when you bring them back to life. Not a shout, not applause, just the click of a key daring to be heard again. Sarah set the typewriter on the table, rolled in a sheet of paper. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She didn't overthink it this time. The first letters clacked out unevenly, like a heartbeat learning its rhythm. The waitress had wings she didn't know how to use. She stopped, smiled, then kept typing. Bedroom doorway, continuous. Emma leaned against the frame, sleepy but watching. The way you watch something sacred without meaning to. Are you writing again? She asked softly. Sarah nodded. Yeah, I guess I am. Emma grinned. What's it called? Sarah thought for a moment, then reached up and typed the title on the top line. Waitress with Wings. The typewriter's rhythmic clicks filled the quiet morning, each one louder, surer, like a heartbeat returning after too long a sleep. Bluebird Cafe, late afternoon. The golden light of sunset stretched through the cafe windows, glinting off sugar jars and chrome espresso handles. It was the slow hour, before the evening rush, when everything felt suspended in amber. Sarah wiped down the counter, humming softly under her breath. The bell above the door jingled. Jonathan Chase stepped in. Same calm posture, same quiet confidence, but this time with a worn leather satchel in hand. Do you ever go anywhere else? She teased, smiling carefully. He shrugged. Depends who's here. She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the faint blush as she reached for a mug. Coffee? Please. 2 sugars this time, he said. I need courage. He took a seat at his usual table. When she brought the cup over, he gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. I'm working. You're stalling, he replied, sliding an envelope onto the table, this one thinner, hand-addressed. Sarah hesitated before sitting, her apron still on, her name tag catching the light. He pulled out a contract, neatly stapled logo of Chase Publishing in the corner. You finished your story, he said. I read it last night. Her breath caught. Already? I couldn't stop. It's honest, raw. A voice people don't get to hear. I want to publish it properly. You and I both know it deserves that. It's hard to believe in yourself when you've spent years being proof that no one else did. He slid a pen across the table. Sign this, or I'll publish it without you. Sarah stared at him wide-eyed, then laughed. The first real laugh he'd ever heard from her. The pen trembled between her fingers, not from fear, from the weight of everything she'd waited to become. Bluebird Cafe. Days later, rain again. Softer this time, more forgiving. Through the cafe window, the city glowed faintly with promise. Sarah stood behind the counter in her apron, wiping cups, lost in thought. When the door opened, she didn't look up right away. Table for 1, said a familiar voice. She turned. Jonathan stood there, holding a slim package under his arm. Delivery for Miss Halden, he said with a grin. Counter. Continuous. He set the package on the counter and slid it toward her. Go on, he said. Open it, Sarah frowned. Is this? Proof copy, he said simply. Her fingers trembled as she tore the tape. Inside lay a single book. Matte cover, her name at the bottom in clean serif font. She turned it over, heart pounding. The cover image was Emma's napkin sketch. The bird, the moon, the pen. Every detail, redrawn, softened, but still hers. Sometimes the universe doesn't give your dreams back the way you left them. Sometimes it hands them back made whole. The same soul, a new skin. Sarah's throat tightened. You used her art. Jonathan nodded. She inspired it. I just made sure the world could see. Apartment. Later that night, Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, book in her lap. Emma beside her, eyes wide, fingers tracing the cover. Is that mine? Emma asked. Sarah nodded through a trembling smile. It's ours. Sarah turned to the first page. Her story. Her words. She whispered, "We did it." Her hands shook, but for once, it wasn't from fear. It was from joy that finally had a shape. Bluebird Cafe. Saturday afternoon, the cafe that once smelled only of espresso and rain now smelled of fresh ink and possibility. Tables were pushed to the sides. A small banner hung near the entrance. Local author event. Sarah Halden, waitress with wings. The air buzzed with chatter and coffee steam. Customers clutched copies of her book, dog-eared and underlined, waiting for signatures. Sarah stood behind the counter. No apron this time. A soft cream blouse. Her hair loose. The same quiet eyes, but brighter. Beside her sat Emma, proud as the moon, passing out bookmarks with the napkin bird logo. The same walls that once held her exhaustion now echoed her name. The same hands that once wiped tables now signed stories. A woman approached the counter. Older, kind eyes. "I used to see you writing here," she said. "Didn't think you'd remember me." Sarah smiled. "I remember everyone who left a tip big enough to make me dream." Laughter. Warmth. A flash of camera light. Jonathan stood quietly in the back, watching. Not as an editor, as a witness. Flashback. Montage. Sarah serving coffee. Scribbling on receipts. Hiding her stories under the mattress. Emma drawing on napkins. Rain washing away ink and doubt. Then, the typewriter. The new title. The Open Wings. Back to present a teenage waitress, maybe 16, watched from a corner table wide-eyed, whispering to her friend, "I want to be her." Sarah looked up just in time to see the girl watching. Their eyes met. Two versions of the same dream. And for the first time, Sarah didn't look away. Sarah's living room, early morning, the room was quiet. Too quiet. Stacks of her own book, Waitress with Wings, sat in neat piles along the wall, each one perfectly signed, untouched since the last reading. The typewriter sat on the table. A fresh page rolled in. Blank. Waiting. Sarah stared at it. The steady tick of the clock felt louder than her thoughts. Sometimes success doesn't silence doubt. It feeds it. Because once you've been heard, the fear isn't of being ignored anymore. It's of saying something that no longer matters. She pressed one key. A single letter. Then backspaced. Tried again. Stopped. Her. Reflection in the window stared back at her. The woman who was supposed to be the next voice of hope. The one who used to believe in late nights and lamplight. Now she just felt hollow. Emma tiptoed in, holding her breakfast plate. "You're not writing today?" Sarah forced a smile. "Just thinking," Emma frowned. "About what?" Sarah looked down at the empty page. "About how to start again." Bedroom later. She sat on the edge of the bed, phone buzzing with notifications. Interviews, podcast requests, book club invites. She turned it face down. Her fingers brushed the typewriter keys again but didn't press. The paper stayed white. The ink ribbon waited. And in the silence between heartbeats she whispered, "What if the first book was just luck?" Small apartment. Evening. The applause was gone. The interviews had ended. The world had moved on. Back to its noise, its scroll, its new obsessions. But inside her apartment, silence reigned. Sarah sat on the couch, still in yesterday's sweater. A mug of tea had gone cold beside her. The TV flickered quietly in the background. Some show she wasn't watching. Emma's laughter filled the hallway as she practiced a school play with a friend on video chat. Her small voice, bright and innocent, floated through the walls. It didn't reach Sarah. It's strange how success can sound like loneliness. When the clapping stops, you realize how much of it was keeping you warm. On the table, the typewriter sat still. A faint layer of dust had begun to settle, enough to dull its mint color. Next to it, a copy of Waitress with Wings lay open, a sticky note marking a passage. She learned that flight isn't always about leaving. Sometimes it's about staying. Sarah closed it gently, eyes tired. Her reflection in the dark TV screen stared back at her. the author everyone admired, the woman who suddenly didn't know what to say. Kitchen. Later. She stood by the sink, rinsing a single cup. The sound of running water was the only movement in the room. Emma peeked around the corner. "You okay, Mama?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Just tired." Emma nodded, though she didn't believe her. The lights dimmed. The apartment exhaled. And across the room her typewriter waited. Silent, untouched, a monument to everything she wasn't ready to face. Sarah's living room morning rain pattered faintly against the window pane. The world outside felt muted. Even the birds seemed quieter today. Sarah sat at the dining table with her laptop open, scrolling absent-mindedly through reviews of Waitress with Wings. Most were glowing. A few were mixed. And then, she saw it. You can read 100 kind words and forget them in an hour. But one cruel sentence, that one roots itself. She clicked the headline, "A Fluke in Flight. Why Waitress with Wings Doesn't Deserve Its Hype." Her stomach tightened. The reviewer's name was bold, confident. Someone she'd once followed, admired. She began to read aloud, barely whispering the words. Halden's story is sentimental, predictable, and thrives on pity. Her past as a waitress seems to be her only selling point. Tragedy repackaged as talent. She froze. A one-book wonder with waitress trauma. Her eyes blurred, throat tightening. She slammed the laptop shut. The sound echoed through the small apartment like thunder. Kitchen. Continuous. She gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. Emma peeked in, holding her drawing pad. "Mama!" Sarah turned quickly, forcing a shaky smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Emma frowned. "You look sad." "I'm just tired." Emma nodded slowly, retreating, leaving behind the smell of crayons and comfort that Sarah suddenly missed too much. Sarah opened the laptop again, not to reread the review but to stare at the blinking cursor on a blank page. For the first time since she began, she didn't believe her words could matter again. The cursor blinked. Unforgiving. Endless. Small apartment. Late night. The world slept. But Sarah couldn't. Her laptop glowed faintly from the kitchen table, still open to the cruel review, frozen mid-sentence. The words glared back at her like they were carved into glass. She stood, restless, pacing. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Every creak of the floorboard felt louder in the dark. Doubt doesn't scream. It whispers. It curls up beside you when you're alone and asks, "Who are you to dream again?" She wandered toward Emma's room, pushing the half-open door gently. Moonlight washed over the small bed. The stuffed bird tucked under her daughter's arm. Something caught Sarah's eye on the nightstand. A small blue notebook, its cover peeling at the edges. She hesitated, then picked it up carefully. Inside, pages filled with drawings and words, crayon sketches of a woman and a little girl, sitting at a table with books and coffee cups. A page labeled "Our Story." Her heart clenched. The page. In childish handwriting. Mama writes stories that make people feel less alone. I draw them so they know who she is. Tears welled instantly. She flipped another page. Emma had drawn the Bluebird Cafe. The window. The napkin. The man with kind eyes. At the bottom of the last page, a message. This is our real story. Mama, don't forget it. Sarah sat down beside Emma's bed, covering her mouth as silent tears fell. She looked at her daughter sleeping, peaceful, certain, untouched by the world's cynicism. And in that moment, Sarah remembered what she'd written for all along, not for praise, not for money, for truth. Small coffee shop, morning. The bell above the door chimed as Sarah stepped inside. Not the Bluebird Cafe this time, but a small corner shop uptown, quiet and unassuming. The smell of roasted beans mingled with rain-soaked coats and faint jazz. She spotted him instantly. The critic, the one who had written the review, typing on his laptop, earbuds dangling, completely unaware that the woman he'd labeled a fluke was standing 10 feet away. Sarah froze, heart hammering. She could turn around, leave. No one would know. But Emma's words echoed softly in her mind. "This is our real story, Mama. Don't forget it." She took a breath, then walked forward. Some storms you don't escape, some you walk straight into, because running only proves they were right about your fear. "Excuse me," she said gently. He looked up, startled. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Oh, you're Sarah Halden," she finished. "The one-book wonder with waitress trauma." He stammered. "Look, it wasn't personal." "It never is," she interrupted, voice calm but sharp. "That's what makes it so easy to say." The critic blinked, caught off guard. Sarah continued, "Steady now. You don't have to like my story. But don't mistake softness for weakness. Some of us learn to write by surviving. Silence. Only the hiss of the espresso machine in the background." She picked up the sugar packet from his table, turning it in her fingers. "I wasn't writing for you," she said quietly. "I was writing to breathe." She set the packet down, gave him a small, tired smile, and walked out. No shouting, no vindication, just peace. Outside, the rain had stopped, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel small. Chase Publishing Office. Afternoon. A skyline of polished glass framed the city below. Sarah sat across from Jonathan, his desk cluttered with manuscripts, half-empty coffee cups, and the weight of unspoken expectations. The air between them was thick. Not with anger, but with distance. Jonathan leaned forward, tapping the table with his pen. "It's been 3 months, Sarah." "I know. You haven't sent a draft." "I know," she said again, quieter. He exhaled. "You're a talent people wait decades to find. And right now, you're disappearing when the world wants more." She looked down at her hands, ink-stained again from the morning. "Maybe I just need to live a little before I write again." Jonathan frowned. "This isn't about living. It's about momentum. The higher they lift you, the less they remember you're human. They forget that wings, even new ones, still ache from the first flight." Sarah looked up. "You said I was different, that my voice mattered. Now it feels like you want a product, not a person." "That's not fair," Jonathan replied, frustration creeping in. "You're sitting on gold, and I'm trying to help you shine." She stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "Gold doesn't shine without fire first." Their eyes locked. Silence stretched, pulsing. Jonathan's tone softened. "I just don't want you to lose everything you've built." She gathered her bag, her movements deliberate. "I already lost everything once. This time, I'm losing it on my own terms." She stopped at the door, turned slightly. "I'm not your investment," she said quietly. "I'm still becoming." She left him staring at the empty chair, the echo of her defiance hanging heavier than any word he could publish. Bluebird Cafe, early morning. The cafe was quieter than she remembered. The same faint hum of machines, the same chalkboard menu, the same smell of espresso and rain. But this time, Sarah wasn't behind the counter as an author or a guest. She was back as herself. Apron tied, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned back the way she used to. The new manager had hesitated when she asked for a few shifts. "Are you sure?" he'd asked. "You don't have to." She'd just smiled. "I need to." Sometimes you go back not because you've fallen, but because you need to remember what it felt like to rise. Sarah moved between tables with quiet grace, taking orders, refilling cups. The regulars still recognized her. Some asked for autographs between lattes and sugar packets. She laughed politely, but inside, she was listening. To the rhythm of footsteps, the soft exchanges, the murmurs of small lives unfolding. Each sound reminded her why she'd started writing in the first place. Counter. Later. The morning rush passed. A stray napkin sat near the register. She picked it up, scribbling something in the corner before she could overthink it. Every ordinary place carries the ghost of the person you used to be. She smiled faintly, then turned the napkin over and wrote again. Maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's the silence that finally feels safe. She folded it and tucked it into her pocket. A receipt fluttered loose from her apron. She picked it up and scribbled one more line. The seed of her next story. The woman who came back to where it all began. Small apartment. Nighta, warm light filled the room. Not too bright, just enough to make shadows gentle. The typewriter had returned to its rightful place on the table. Beside it sat a half-empty mug, a small vase of wilting daisies, and a stack of blank napkins from the cafe. Sarah sat cross-legged, hair loosely tied, shoulders relaxed. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant then steady. Click, click, click. Each sound echoed like a heartbeat rediscovering rhythm. You don't start over. You continue. With the same hands, the same scars, but a different reason. She reached for one of the napkins, smoothing it out carefully. In the corner, she scribbled the first line of her new story. She thought she had to leave the cafe to find herself. But maybe she was always waiting for the courage to return. She smiled faintly, pressing the words into the paper as though anchoring them to the world. Living room. Later Emma was sprawled on the couch doing homework. Colored pencils scattered everywhere. Sarah slid one of the napkins toward her. "Want to name this one for me?" she asked. Emma looked up, curious. "What's it about?" Sarah shrugged playfully. "A mom, a kid, some tables, some dreams." Emma grinned, writing carefully in her small, looping letters. "The table we shared." Sarah read it, tears glimmering. "Perfect." She pinned the napkin to the wall above her desk, next to the faded bird and moon drawing. 2 napkins, 2 beginnings, one written in hope, the other in peace. Small apartment, afternoon. The afternoon light spilled across the kitchen table, turning ordinary dust into tiny gold constellations. Emma sat on the floor with her colored pencils, humming as she worked on a new drawing. Sarah was sorting through mail. Bills, flyers, a catalog she didn't remember subscribing to, and then a plain white envelope. Return address, City Library, Community Events Department. She frowned, opening it carefully. Inside was a neatly folded letter. The letter, "Dear Ms. Halden, your story, Waitress with Wings, inspired many in our community. We're hosting an author showcase this month, celebrating local voices that have shaped our readers' hearts. We'd be honored if you would read from your book and share what inspired you. Please feel free to bring your family." With admiration, the City Library Committee. Sarah read it twice before she smiled. It wasn't a magazine feature. It wasn't a national award. But it was something real. An invitation from the same place that first carried her name on its shelves. Sometimes recognition isn't applause. Sometimes it's a quiet letter reminding you that what you gave away still found its way back home. She looked at Emma. "Guess who's been invited to read at the library?" Emma gasped. "You? Can I come?" Sarah nodded, voice soft but proud. "This time we're both on the stage, sweetheart." Emma ran to hug her, the letter still in Sarah's hand, creasing slightly as they held on. Outside, wind rustled through the open window, pages turning somewhere far away. Local bookstore, late afternoon. The same little bookstore where her journey had begun. The one that smelled like old paper, where light filtered through dusty blinds. Now looked brighter somehow. Familiar, but changed. Or maybe it was just Sarah who had changed. She stepped inside slowly, Emma by her side, the bell over the door jingling like a memory. The owner, an older woman with silver hair and round glasses, looked up from the counter. Recognition spread across her face. "I know you," she said, smiling warmly. "You used to buy dollar books after your shifts." Sarah laughed softly. "And now I'm trying to see if I'm worth the full price. The places that once held your hunger always know when you've come back full." They walked past the aisles together, the same wooden floorboards creaking beneath her shoes, the same crooked fiction sign dangling slightly to the left. Sarah turned the corner and stopped. There it was, a small display table near the entrance, stacked copies of Waitress with Wings, her name in elegant gold letters. But it wasn't just that. The cover. Emma's napkin art, reimagined, glowing under the shop lights. The bird, the moon, the hope. Emma's eyes widened. "Mama, that's mine." Sarah knelt beside her, voice trembling. "Ours, baby." The owner approached, wiping her glasses. "Would you mind signing a few for us?" "We've had people asking," Sarah smiled, blinking away tears. "I'd love to." She signed the first copy, her pen moving slowly, deliberately. Above her printed name, she wrote by hand, "For the dreamers who still serve tables." Her fingers lingered on the cover. Her book, her art, her wings. City Library. Evening soft light spilled through tall arched windows, catching dust motes that floated like tiny ghosts of stories past. The event banner stretched across the back wall. Local author showcase, Voices of Grace. Rows of chairs filled the reading room. Some faces she recognized. Cafe regulars, old co-workers, even her landlord sitting awkwardly in the back row. And there, front and center, Emma, her legs swinging beneath her chair, holding a copy of Waitress with Wings like it was sacred text. Sarah stood behind a podium, her name printed neatly on a placard. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She had stood in rooms before, classrooms, cafes, empty apartments, but never in one that listened because they wanted to, not because they had to. She cleared her throat, voice soft at first. "I used to come here to hide," she began. "Between these shelves, I wasn't a waitress or a single mom or a statistic. I was just someone who believed in words." A few smiles in the crowd. Emma beamed. Sarah continued, stronger now. "I wrote this story when I had nothing left but napkins, coffee, and a reason to keep going. Turns out that's enough." Laughter rippled through the room. Warm, genuine. After her reading, applause filled the space. Not loud or wild, just whole. An older woman approached as the crowd thinned, her high school English teacher. She placed a hand on Sarah's arm and whispered, smiling, "We always knew you'd write something real." Sarah glanced toward the back of the room where Emma sat, small, proud, waving. And for the first time, she felt it fully. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was being seen. Chase Publishing Office. Dia skyline of glass shimmered in the morning light. Sarah sat across from Jonathan Chase, but this time, it wasn't the same woman who'd once fidgeted in her apron, afraid to be taken seriously. Now she was dressed simply, but with quiet confidence. A calm steadiness replaced the trembling nerves. Jonathan flipped through a folder filled with sales figures and glowing reviews. "Your book hasn't just sold," he said, grinning. "It's traveled. Book clubs, schools, libraries, it's everywhere." Sarah smiled faintly. "That's good to hear." He leaned forward, eyes bright. "Which is why I want to talk about your next one." He slid a fresh contract across the desk. "We're offering a higher advance, wider distribution, and—" She raised a hand gently. "Before you go on, there's a moment when gratitude stops sounding like obedience and starts sounding like ownership." She unfolded the first page of the contract. Her name was printed in bold at the top. "No pen yet, no signature. Jonathan," she said calmly. "You gave me my first chance. You believed in me before I did. But if I'm going to do another book—" He looked up, curious. "Yes? I want to do it on my terms." He blinked, surprised. "Meaning?" Sarah smiled slightly. "No edits without my consent. No market rewrites. No stripping the story of where it came from." She tapped the page gently. "This time I want creative control." Jonathan studied her for a moment, then smiled, not with defeat, but pride. "You sound like a real author." She met his gaze evenly. "No, just a woman who finally knows her worth." Jonathan nodded and slid the contract back toward her. "Then let's print that version." Sarah picked up the pen. This time her hand didn't shake. Community center, classroom, afternoon. The room smelled faintly of markers and old coffee. A semicircle of folding chairs filled the small space, sunlight streaming through tall windows that framed the city outside. On the whiteboard, written in Sarah's careful handwriting, "Writing Workshop, Finding Your Voice." She stood at the front, holding a worn notebook. Not as an author now, but as a mentor. 5 women sat before her. Different ages, different stories. One wore a diner uniform. Another still had her nurse badge clipped to her scrubs. All of them carried the same uncertain look she once wore. The quiet ache of wanting to speak, but not knowing how. Sometimes healing means turning your scars into maps, so someone else doesn't get lost where you did. Sarah smiled gently. All right, she began. I'm not here to teach grammar. I'm here to remind you that your life already is a story. One worth reading. A woman in the back raised her hand timidly. But what if nobody wants to hear it? Sarah stepped closer, voice low but sure. Then write it louder until they do. Soft laughter broke out. The tension eased. Pens lifted. For the first time, the room felt alive. She walked around, glancing at the opening lines on each page. A few words here. A memory there. Hope flickering in ink. Emma peeked through the door, whispering to a volunteer. That's my mom. Sarah turned back to the group, her voice warm and certain. You don't need a desk to be a writer, she said, smiling. Just truth. The camera lingered on the women writing. The sound of pens scratching against paper. As Sarah watched, eyes glimmering, her reflection in the whiteboard surrounded by the word voice. Bluebird Cafe. Evening golden light spilled through the cafe windows just like years ago. The same hum of the espresso machine, the same quiet chatter blending with the soft clinking of mugs. But this time, Sarah wasn't behind the counter. She was seated by the window, notebook open, pen gliding in slow, thoughtful strokes. Her posture relaxed, her expression peaceful. The walls now displayed framed photos of local artists and writers. One of them showed Sarah and Emma from her first book signing. Her coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. Writing had never been about comfort. A waitress, maybe 17, approached shyly, holding a folded napkin. Excuse me, she said nervously. You're Sarah Halden, right? The author? Sarah looked up, smiling gently. That's what they tell me. The girl blushed, twisting the napkin in her hands. Your book. It made me start writing again. My mom works nights and I read it during breaks. It felt like you were talking about us. Sarah's eyes softened. That means more than you think. The girl hesitated, then handed her the napkin. I made this. It's dumb, but... Sarah unfolded it. A sketch. Rough, sweet, familiar. A woman sitting at a cafe table, wings faintly forming from the pages of an open book. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about leaving pieces of courage behind, small enough for someone else to carry. Sarah smiled, tears glinting. This isn't dumb at all. It's beautiful. The girl grinned shyly. It's a cover idea. For your next book. Sarah looked down at the napkin, then out the window, her reflection layered over the sketch. A woman once broken by the world, now drawing new wings from its next dreamer. Sarah's home office. Early morning, soft sunlight spilled across the desk, touching the familiar chaos. Notebooks stacked unevenly, coffee stains marking the corners, napkins pinned to the corkboard like relics of her journey. The new manuscript sat open before Sarah, its cover page crisp and freshly printed. The Table We Shared by Sarah Halden. She took a deep breath and smiled. The cursor blinked beside one last unfinished section. The dedication. She looked over at Emma, now a teenager, sitting cross-legged on the couch with her sketchbook. The same spark in her eyes. The same heart that once believed her mother could fly. Every story begins for one reason, but the truest ones end with gratitude. Sarah began to type slowly, each word deliberate. For the little artist who never let me give up. For the one who drew wings before I ever believed I had them. This story, like all my stories, belongs to you. She stared at the words, tears filling her eyes, then hit save. Living room. Later Emma returned from school, backpack sliding to the floor. On the table sat a proof copy of The Table We Shared. A note was tucked inside the cover. Page 1. Top corner, she opened it, read the dedication. Her hands flew to her mouth, eyes glistening. She didn't say a word, just looked up at her mother, sitting quietly nearby. Sarah smiled softly. Do you like it? Emma nodded, voice trembling. I love it. Emma hugged the book to her chest. Sarah watched, heart full. The way a creator watches their creation breathe for the first time. Bluebird Cafe. Late evening. The cafe was closing for the night. Chairs flipped upside down on tables, lights dimmed to soft gold. The faint scent of coffee beans lingered in the air, mixing with the quiet hum of nostalgia. Sarah sat in her favorite corner booth, the same one where she once scribbled her dreams between refills and exhaustion. The table still had the faint scratch marks from old customers, the small dent where her elbow used to rest when she'd leaned to write. On the seat beside her, a single, signed copy of her new book, The Table We Shared. Sometimes closure isn't about ending something, it's about returning it to where it began, so the story can keep walking without you. She ran her fingers along the book's edge, smiling softly, then placed it carefully in the center of the table. No note, no announcement, just a silent offering for whoever needed it next. She looked around the cafe one last time. The warm lights, the gentle hum of the espresso machine, the ghosts of all the versions of herself that once sat here. The waitress, the dreamer, the mother, the writer. Then she stood, tucked her hair behind her ear, and walked out into the cool night. Bluebird Cafe. Next morning. The sunlight filtered through the windows as a new day began. A young man, mid-20s, college sweater, tired eyes, sat at the same table. He noticed the book, curious, picked it up. The Table We Shared, by Sarah Halden. He flipped it open to the dedication. Smiled. The bell chimed softly as the door opened again, light flooding in. The camera lingered on the book, resting where it belonged. A quiet legacy left behind for the next dreamer. Sarah's apartment, early morning. The world outside was waking up. Pale sunlight spilling across the windows, city sounds distant and soft. Steam rose from a mug of tea beside the typewriter. On the wall, the napkin drawings, the library letter, a photo from the book signing. Artifacts of a journey that no longer felt like struggle, but proof of becoming. Sarah sat at her desk, hair pulled into a messy bun, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. A fresh page waited in the typewriter. Blank. Unintimidating. Inviting. Every ending is just a whisper toward another beginning. And sometimes, the courage to begin again is the quietest kind of victory. She placed her hands on the keys. The familiar sound, click, clack, click, returned like a heartbeat syncing with her own. The camera moved slowly across the desk, past the cup of tea, the pile of her books, the framed napkin art drawn by little hands years ago. Emma appeared in the doorway, now older but still carrying that same brightness. "Writing again?" she asked. Sarah turned, smiling softly. "Always," she began to type. "This isn't the end of my story. It's just the prologue to whatever comes next." The words glowed faintly in the morning light, each keystroke landing with certainty, with peace. Sarah looked out the window, the sun breaking through clouds. She smiled to herself, eyes bright, whispering, "For the first time, I write without fear." The typewriter continued to click, fade to warm light, then to black.